Thank you so much, Joe, for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to ask, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Hanging in there.
Good, hanging in there. That's all. That's all you need to do, right?
That's right. It's all it's
Good.
asked of me. It's all I'm required to do.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. There's a lot I want to talk to you about, but I first want to ask the beginning in terms of your journey getting into writing and being a comic writer, or just like writing stories in general. What was that first real inspiration for you to want to get into doing this?
Well, I'd always I've been reading comics since as far back as I can remember.
Mm,
And it's one of those things where it's like a match made in heaven. You gravitate towards something and you just it fits. It fits your sensibility. You get it. It's like being a musician. You just instantly know how to play.
mm-hmm.
Um, I just fell in love with the medium from the jump and been unhealthily attached to it ever since. So then it just became a situation where how can I do this for a living? How can I do this all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I was lucky enough to get there. So here we are.
Like, what was your first like actual gig? Like, how like was it like a thing to where you were like working on stuff on your own, and then you like just happenstance to meet somebody, or how did that go?
I when I was in high school, I was doing this was like right at the tail end of the famous black and white boom,
Mm,
and there was a lot of small press stuff going. So I was doing stuff like in that arena,
mm-hmm.
and then I moved out to California and started meeting a lot of other professional comic book writers, and they kind of pulled the curtain back to see how it really worked, how you make a
Mm-hmm.
living doing this, what life is like when you do this for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to I was at that point I was doing my own black and white independent stuff just to get into print.
Yeah.
Had little gigs here and there, but it was a famous writer for Marvel and DC named James Robinson, who he did a great book that people know from the '90s, Starman,
Oh,
and
okay.
he got me in at Marvel. He was
Mm-hmm.
working at Marvel doing some of their books at the time, and he basically opened the door for me and shoved me in there. And once I got in, I never left.
Mm-hmm. Like once you got your foot through the door, it was it. It was all she
That was
wrote.
it. Yeah, I've been waiting to get that foot in my entire life up to that point.
I'm guessing when you started out, you had like a guideline. Were you did you have freedom to do stuff you wanted to do, or was it it took time for you to get more of that freedom to tell what or stories or things you wanted to do?
Well, I was a real student of the medium, of the business. So when I got in, I knew what the expectations were. I knew pretty much what the parameters were. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't go in unaware of what was expected of me, what was expected of me to contribute to the material or how to interpret the material. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a lot of uh, culture shock. I mean, I knew the culture already.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, which is why I was able to stay in it because I understood it fairly quickly. Um, and of course, as I went on and gained more of a reputation and gained more trust from editors and people who could had the power to hire me,
Mm-hmm.
I had a little bit more freedom. I had a little bit more elbow room. And in comics, as you make a name for yourself, as you build a reputation, you can curate that reputation. You can curate your how people perceive you, what kind of writer you are, what kind of creator you are.
Yeah.
And I went in a little iconoclastic and a little rebellious, and that stuck. And it gave me a lot of. It ended up giving me a lot of freedom because no one expected me to always toe the line. I mean, I was
Yeah.
professional as anybody else. I mean, I hit my
Mm-hmm.
deadlines. I did the part that makes editors tear their hair out. That part I was good with.
Mm-hmm.
But I made sure that my voice was always there, and that I wasn't just some hack company man. And that, in the long run, even though at some certain times I would get nervous, like, oh shit, what am I? Is
Yeah.
this going to be good for my career or not? In the long run, it was very good for my career because
Gotcha.
it established my identity as a creator, and so it's I've been able to cash in on that ever since.
Was there a particular character at Marvel or a particular run that you really wanted to work on, or like something you wanted to do and it finally got you, or was there a character you never got to work on that you really wanted to?
Well, when I was growing up, I was a big Avengers guy. That was my jam. That was my
Mm-hmm.
book. That's what I loved. And it just, luckily, it was probably one of the best books at Marvel at the time when I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
Had George Perez and John Byrne drawing it, Jim Shooter, David Michelinie writing it. Favorite creators of mine to
Mm-hmm.
this day. Um, so of course, ironically, when I broke in at Marvel, they put me on X-Men titles. That's kind of where I broke in.
Yeah.
So I feel like I did my apprenticeship on the biggest franchise in comics at the time. And eventually, probably about 6, 7 years in, I got to do some Avengers projects, and I was able to fulfill that dream that I'd had when I was a kid. So I eventually got to it.
Eventually did. Eventually did. And that's really cool that you finally got to that point to work on those characters because Marvel and even DC as well. And you've worked on some DC stuff too. And you've worked on outside like Image Comics and stuff. You've worked on a lot of things. To work on these characters, it's a big tall order at times. Like, do you ever
Yeah.
feel nervous working on those things, or like feel the pressure of like the weight of how important these characters are to people?
I would depend on the character. I mean, in my case, I lucked out in that the two big franchises I landed on early in my career was the X-Men and Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of which were my big books when I was a kid. I didn't really have. I mean, I liked the characters,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved the Superman movies. And when John Byrne drew the X-Men or Paul Smith drew the X-Men, I was right there. But
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't gaga over either one of them. So I could come to those characters as a writer in a more professional way. I wasn't fulfilling childhood, fantasies at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was able to work through those kind of issues on characters that I wasn't so emotionally attached to.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finally got around to writing the Avengers or writing Iron Man or whatever it was that I really loved from being a kid, I had I was really professional by that time. So I was, even though at the time I was really jazzed to write the
Mm-hmm.
Avengers, I had done enough work and been around the block enough that I was not, it didn't take me down to my knees like, oh my God, I'm writing the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of had my head at that point, was able to do it. I enjoyed it. It was great. I loved it, but I was a full fledged professional by that point.
Gotcha. So like you kind of got the nerves out,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like, oh, if I do something with the Avengers or say Iron Man, then maybe the fans will go, like I also got to find that balance, right? Because you're like, oh, I want to do this. Like, but maybe that's too far, right? Maybe that's too out of the
Well,
norm. Oh.
yeah, but the thing about writing something that you're a fan of
Mm-hmm.
is that if you please yourself, you can kind of, it's not a guarantee, but you can generally assume that other people will like it too. I mean, if you like it and understand it as a fan, then you gotta. I just assumed that other fans would know that I was on their wavelength, that I was, I was one of them,
Mm-hmm.
and that tended to be the case. I mean, you can't please everybody, but I think people who were as big a fan of the Avengers as I was when I wrote those series, and they were historical based series. I was not doing the main book. I was doing stories that were like untold tales that were set in the past. So
Yeah.
I was dealing with really classic iterations of these characters, and if I felt like I was getting them right, I thought other people would think so too, and that tended to be the case.
Yeah, that shows that your confidence. When it comes to writing specifically, is there something in particular you like writing the most in terms of like a certain story or a certain like pivotal point in stories, or is it just like you just love the journey of starting a story or kind of continuing a narrative that's been built?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that at, early on, when I was writing comics full time, I was really trying to purge my influences, and
Mm,
really, um, I was doing riffs on other things that I'd loved when I was a kid and other storytelling techniques. I wanted to. It was like going to school in a way, except I was getting paid for it and people were buying it and
yeah.
having to read it. Um, then I went through the. Then I got that all out of my system, and I felt like I was coming at the material in a really what I felt was an original place. I was bringing outside influences into it and doing something that hadn't been done before, whether it was on Superman or whatever. Or when I worked at Wildstorm, which was one of the early image um, studios that eventually got sold to DC, but they were
Hmm.
still their own thing. So when I worked on books like Wildcats and
Yeah.
stuff in that universe, I was able to. I wasn't homaging anything. I wasn't indulging in any influences. I was just. It was purely what I wanted to do with it. And then I got through that phase, and then there was the next phase, which was trying to encompass all of it. The things I'd loved as a kid, the things I'd learned as an adult, as a professional, being original by also, but while at the same time accessing everything about comics that I loved. It was kind of a scratch mix approach to writing
Hmm.
comics. And I think for the most part, I'm still in that phase. I'm just finding different ways of indulging the things I love about comics and both the things that exist and the things that haven't existed yet. I
Mm.
think I've got the balance after, you know, quarter century. I think I got the balance right.
It does take time because if you got it right away, then maybe you would feel like you're kind of stagnant, like you're not growing as a writer. Like you have to
Yeah,
go through those times where you're going to be challenged, and maybe it maybe you go, well, I wish I didn't go through that, but at the same time, maybe it needed to happen in order for me to overcome that and be better.
yeah. I have no regrets. I mean, I've certainly had my share of career missteps and things that you go, oh my god, I can't believe, But
Yeah.
you have to go through those things. But I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true. You definitely learn more from failure than you do from success.
Hmm.
Success, it happens and you enjoy it in whatever form it takes. Failure, you're forced to confront yourself and figure out, well, why did that fail? What did where did I go wrong? What was
Yeah.
how can I do better next time? I mean, it's just, the lessons are invaluable. Not that I would wish failure on myself or anybody else, but if there's an upside to it, that is the upside.
Exactly. You look back and go, it needed to happen that way in order for me to be here. So and that's
Yeah,
okay to it's okay to look at those mistakes. Like I regret stuff in my life, but I would probably wouldn't be myself. I wouldn't be myself who I am today if I didn't have those mistakes.
right.
So
Exactly right.
it's all about the life. It's all about the journey. I want to ask specifically about this too. So you were the co-creator of America Chavez. How was it
Yes, I
creating
will.
a how was it creating a character? Like going from writing characters you'd known and then going to let's introduce somebody new.
Well, I've created characters before at Marvel and
Mm-hmm.
DC, but usually uh, villains or side characters, or never somebody that was meant to be so prominent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think in retrospect, that's one of those things in my career that sort of fall between. It straddles the line between success and failure. Obviously, the character went on to have a really have a. It's I mean, it's still having a life.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond my time on when writing her. She
Mm-hmm.
appeared in the movie and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, it wasn't the smartest business decision, considering the deals that you make, or in my case, don't make with
Mm-hmm.
these big corporations when you create something that they own.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the creative side, um, I didn't get to do enough with the character to firmly establish her parameters. So I refer to her as the first open source superhero character,
Oh, gotcha.
where
Okay.
everybody who came on after me added little bits and changed little bits and altered little bits, and
Hmm.
it became kind of a hodgepodge of a character to the point where, you know, from what I understand, Marvel has had to retcon her origin maybe twice so far. Twice in 13 years or whatever, however long it's been, 14 years since I created her.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's quite something. It took Wolverine several decades before they started retconning shit. So
Yeah.
um, you know, so your mileage may vary. I mean, I think again, I wouldn't change anything, but that's one of those points in my career that I have, I guess you could say, mixed emotions about.
Okay. Yeah. I was unaware of that. I was just curious because I think when you're in this medium in terms of writing for characters, like especially with you saying you love Avengers, you love Iron Man, you love working on these characters, that in order to to come up with characters and create new things, it's like you're making, you're expanding what's out there in the worlds that you're
Yeah,
working on. And I felt like that's always fascinating because I mean, as a creator, that must be exciting. Like, yes, mixed emotions, and I understand your points about the corporation side and the deals, but like in terms of the creative, like, hey, I got to say I brought this character into the world, and what they did with it afterwards, I mean, that's a separate discussion. But I think it's really cool because for me, I would love to have the opportunity to create and build something, but maybe it wouldn't go over well. I don't know. You never know.
well, you never know until you do it. I didn't certainly
Hmm.
didn't have any expectations one way or the other that that character would go on and have a life beyond when
Hmm.
we introduced her. So
Hmm.
that, I mean, that part is very cool and very gratifying. Um, but I had no designs of like, this is the one. This is, I mean, I
Okay.
thought she was cool, and I knew
Hmm.
that she was a necessary character for the times. And this was really and this was 2010, 2011. So it was
Hmm.
even before that sort of mid-teens wave of diversity, and where the emphasis was really on
Hmm.
expanding the audience base. I just thought, you know, and there needed to be a character like that. So I
Yeah.
was in the position to do it, so I did it.
And
So
yeah,
that
now the
part,
character.
that part, I'm proud of.
Of course. Well, well, that's good. I think like whenever whatever profession you're in, there's always going to be those things that make a mixed emotion. But like
Yeah.
all the work you've done, I mean, it's like it's a lot. Like I was going through, I'm like, oh, like there's so much, so much work.
Jordan, I've been around a long time, man.
Yeah, I was going through, I'm like, yeah, I think, yeah, this guy, he's not been around for a couple of years. It's been a bit. It's been
Yeah.
a little bit.
I hate to admit it, but yeah, it's. I think my first when I went pro in '97.
Mm.
So another century.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. And time flies. I mean, you probably thought
Yeah.
at the time, oh, it's gonna feel. No, it is zooms right past. This year's been going by so quick. I mean, it's insane. Uh,
Yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, I wanted to switch gears because I've been watching a show, and you were part of the creation of the show under Man of Action called Ben 10.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so what was your process in terms of being a part of the group that created, like, because you're creating a whole new world. Like, it's not like, oh, you're jumping into something that's already there. Like, you're a part of creating this whole thing that's from the ground up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Cartoon Network. We'd been talking to them, and they wanted an original superhero series.
Hmm.
They had been doing things like Teen Titans and other DC things, and I think they were, from what I understand and what I remember, they were a little burnt out on having to deal with DC.
Oh.
So they wanted something that they wholly controlled and, like you said, built from the ground up. It was not
Hmm.
a licensed thing or a corporate IP that they were taking on. It was brand new.
Hmm.
So the development, again, if memory serves, the development took quite a while. It was probably at maybe almost 2 years from the time we pitched our
Hmm.
initial thing, our initial idea, to developing it, to designing it, testing it, getting it on the air was about 2 years.
Wow.
And I remember at the time, my personal, I mean, we had a good time making it up and coming up with all the characters and all the aliens, and
Hmm.
I mean that was fun. I mean, we've been doing that in comics for years at that point. All of us individually and collectively. So I remember thinking, well, this is kind of cool. Well, maybe we'll get a pilot out of this, and it goes on what was then very thin Man of Action resume. There wasn't a lot on
Hmm.
it. But I thought, that'd be another line on the CV. That's cool. And then the next thing you know, the show's going on the air, and then the show is popular, and then the show is even more popular, and then there's several iterations of it going on, and then
Hmm.
I mean, it just kept on going, and I was floored mainly because, unlike comics, I was not a cartoon guy growing up. I mean, I watched cartoons, but I was not.
Hmm.
I mean, I knew about them, but it was not an ambition of mine ever to be in animation.
Hmm.
It just never, I never considered it as an option. We kind of fell into it based on our work in comics. It's sort of a natural transition to go into that world. And we know other artists that we knew had done it, other writers that we knew had done it.
Hmm.
But to be not only to do it, but to have some measure of success in that field was like, you know, I had no idea that it was going to be anything but just a one-time deal. And it launched our whole career in that field. And we went on to do countless other shows from there.
Yeah, you did so much work on it, and it kept expanding. Like right now, um, I'm currently watching Ultimate Alien. I'm not sure how much work you did on the shows past the original run of Classic. I know you did some work on the reboot, um, and
Yeah,
all that. But I just love what the show and the franchise has done in terms of the continuity and just building more characters, more aliens, and just more stuff with these characters that started in the classic. I mean, I'm blown away because, like you said, it's something from the ground up. It's a brand new IP. Cartoon Network didn't have to license it. It's a whole thing, and you guys could do whatever you want, right? Like you had like,
yeah,
well, here's the concept, but we can just kind of create our own reality because this is something we're not breaking canon or anything. It's like we're building this as we're going.
right. And just
Mm-hmm.
to clarify, I mean, we started on the show. We created obviously, and we're there for all the development. We were consultants on. We wrote some episodes, and
Mm-hmm.
then we kind of veered off into other opportunities in animation.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, the guy who really steered the ship in that middle period of Ben 10 was a guy named Dwayne McDuffie,
Mm-hmm.
who the late great Dwayne McDuffie, who
Yep.
was also a comic book guy. So he
Mm-hmm.
had the same sensibilities. He steered that ship better than anybody possibly could have.
Mm-hmm.
And then, unfortunately, after he passed, we came back on, like you said, for the reboot that sort of took it back to the 10-year-old Ben, and it was, I guess it was a reboot. I mean,
Yeah.
luckily now that general audiences are familiar with the concept of a multiverse, that you can look at the Ben 10, the last Ben 10, as maybe not a reboot, but just a different iteration in a wider Ben 10 multiverse, which is
Mm-hmm.
how we like to look at it. Because then that way you can have it all. You don't
Yeah.
have to
Exactly.
you don't have to think, oh, that version is gone forever or whatever. It's not. It's
Mm-hmm.
all still there. All
Yeah.
can be accessed.
Yeah. There was an episode in Ultimate Alien that literally had an evil older Ben 10, which was referenced in the movies, like the race,
Yep.
I think of Race Against Time, and all these different Bens. So the multiverse was already kind of brought in
Oh
because
yeah.
of that. And yeah, particularly with the classic era, was there any particular aliens you specifically worked on design wise, or was it a collective, like everyone was kind of having a say on those aliens?
Everybody sort of had their say. We worked with some great visual designers. Duncan Rouleau, who's one of the Man of Action partners, is also an artist, so he
Mm-hmm.
was able to chime in on things and work on designs and stuff. But I mean, it's at a certain point when you know something is going to go in a situation like a Cartoon Network show or a Nickelodeon show or whatever, people are brought in, different
Mm-hmm.
people, designers
Yeah.
and other writers and other creators. So it becomes everybody's pitching in. So at
Mm-hmm.
this point, I mean, it's hard to even remember who did what. It was such a mix of people's talents and people's efforts. Um, but in terms of, I remember we were kind of I was certainly partial to Forearms. Was a
Oh yeah.
I love that from the beginning. Heat Blast I
Mm-hmm.
thought was cool.
Yes. Yes.
Ghost Freak, Ghost Freak was we thought was really cool. So there
Yes.
were, I mean, I had favorites,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think each of us. It's funny that there's four guys in Man of Action. Each of us probably has at least one thing that we directly contributed, whether it's a name or something like
Yeah.
the thing that I contributed was Kevin 11. That
Really.
was one of my ideas that got through the process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just made sense. It just
Yeah.
seemed to be natural. So you're always looking for things like that when you're making this stuff up for things that
Mm-hmm.
once I said Kevin 11 out loud, it was like it always been there.
Oh, okay.
Certain ideas just fit because believe me, there were aliens and ideas that we'd come up with that just didn't fit, that just weren't right, and it right away. Like, what about
Mm-hmm.
this? And you go, it just doesn't fit. You just feel it,
Yeah.
and the ones that fit, you feel it right away.
And to think that your contribution of Kevin 11, just saying it out loud, turns into he becomes a main character in the next two series. That's like
Yep.
where I'm up to now in Ultimate Alien. He's a main character, and his first introduction, I love it. It's so good. Like I'm glad that you brought that character to life because that I think that changed. I think Ben 10. Like obviously you got Vilgax and you have the whole mystery of his grandfather, but I think Kevin 11 as a kind of kid villain
Yeah.
against him, it really changes the dynamic of who he's going up against, right? As he's going along with
Yeah.
the Omnitrix.
Well, that just goes back to our comic book roots. I mean, we know how to build comic book style universes,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain roles that characters can fill. So, like you say, you have the Vilgax big cosmic arch nemesis, but you got to have a more grounded, personality wise, an opposite number nemesis,
Yeah.
and that's what Kevin 11 was meant to be for sure.
Was there any other like characters like that were pitched, or if you can remember, that were like Kevin 11, or like you were trying to find a villain that before Kevin 11, or maybe just didn't fit when you were pitching?
Well, I mean, the ones that didn't fit, you kind of excise from your
Oh,
brain because
yeah.
if it's not working, there's no point
Mm-hmm.
in dealing with it. And I mean, the stuff that I remember is more, and I barely remember it. 'Cause when you work on this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you're all in,
Yeah.
and then when it's done, you have to kind of do a brain dump because otherwise you'll carry it with you for no purpose really. I mean, why would you have that info in your head if you're not actively using it? Uh, you know, one day to day in day out like you are when you're working on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I remember there was one thing that I think I came up with it for the reboot. It was a it wasn't even a villain, but it was like a substance called I think called the stuff,
Okay.
which I thought this is a great idea, and it just I mean we did the episode, but it was like it totally laid there. It was not good, not good.
It's all about trial and error, like you said before, in terms of like working in comics. You kind of have those moments of maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, and maybe you think it will, and then because you never know, something may click. Because with you pitching Kevin 11, maybe that episode, maybe it doesn't, maybe fans don't respond well to it. Maybe they go, but people like instantly responded to that character. At least I did when I first watched it.
Well,
Like, you know,
yeah, I mean, and I mean, no spoilers because if you're kind of trying to make your way through
yeah,
all the
mm-hmm,
series,
yeah,
the Kevin 11 that debuted, the one you're familiar with, was ended up being slightly different than what I had envisioned him as.
Mm.
I came up with the name, and I had an idea for him, but that idea got further developed, and it changed and morphed into what made it to air.
Mm-hmm.
But in the reboot, when we came back and sort of took over the show and ran the show, we were able to bring back the more original idea
Mm.
for Kevin, which is that he has his own watch, his own set of sort of bad guy punk rock aliens that he turns into. So it
Mm.
was much more of an option to Ben than the kind of metamorpho elemental powers that he has in what you're watching right now.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool that you were able to go and kind of do your own, like what your original version was when you got to come back and kind of work on a new iteration of the show. Like I said, like a multiverse version where it's,
Yeah,
the same characters but a little bit of a different, because the animation style from what I've seen image wise, so a couple images, it's different. So you're
yeah,
able to do more, and I think you have different voice actors as well. I
yes.
think, yeah. So you're able
Well,
to.
yeah, for the most part, I think there's a few whole,
Oh,
that we
okay.
kept for continuity's sake.
Okay.
Listen, I'm also not advocating one version is better than the other. I mean,
Of course.
that
Mm-hmm.
they're all valid, and they all worked on their own terms, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Yeah. Before I let you go, because I really enjoyed having this conversation, because I really just loved hearing about you guys working on the show, because I've been watching Ben 10 since 2022, and I've been enjoying the
Wow.
journey. Yeah, it's been a
Oh,
long
good.
journey. Yeah. Are you working on anything upcoming like right now? Are you working on anything you can talk about? Or I know there's a lot of times when you're working on stuff you can't talk about it. But are you working on
Yeah,
anything upcoming?
there's some things that we can't talk about. I can tell you. I mean, we've got Sonic on Netflix right now, Sonic Prime.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We've got there's a on YouTube. There's a animated series based on the video game Hello Neighbor that we
Mm.
worked on. There's a bunch of episodes of that online already.
Okay.
And beyond that, let me think. I think that's all that I can talk about. But we've definitely got some other animation irons in the fire. It just the thing about animation, like I said, Ben 10 was a 2 year process
Mm-hmm.
from pitch to air.
Yeah.
These things take animation can take a long time. So there are things that we've been working on. God, I'm turning in a Bible redraft this week on something that we've been working on for 3.5 years, I think.
Wow.
And that's just the Bible stage. That's just the
Mm-hmm.
we're still in the development stage. That's not a show that's even in production yet. So the pandemic slowed some things down, but that's not unusual. That
Mm-hmm.
time frame. Um, so if you work in animation, that's why I still love doing comics because comics is a much more immediate
Yeah.
form
Fast paced.
of yes creation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing things right now that'll be out before the year's over.
Yeah.
So that's a cool feeling to know that you can think of it, execute it, get it out the
Mm-hmm.
door, and get feedback on it right away, and then on to the next thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
if you have the temperament for the churn and burn of comics, it's really great, and
Uh,
it offsets
mm-hmm.
the long range
Mm-hmm.
situation with animation.
Animation, yeah, making those cartoons. You actually brought it up. I forgot to ask this in terms of comics. How fast is a turnaround once you start working on a book? Because I think it's like a couple of months from the start of like writing, art, and then the turnaround to sell.
Well, it depends on the project. If you're talking about a monthly series,
Mm-hmm.
usually um, most most times most of the time it takes probably about 2 months to create a comic book in terms of like from starting with the writing to getting it
Mm-hmm.
to an artist to giving them time to do their job and then colorists and letterers and
Mm-hmm.
packaging and all that kind of stuff. It's probably about a 2.5 month process. So you backtrack from there from your release date. If you have something you want to come out in December, and most places you can get something printed in a matter of weeks. So just imagine it goes to the printer 3 weeks before it's on sale.
Mm-hmm.
Then you backtrack from there the 2.5 3 months it takes to put it all together. Um, Now that's if you're right on the edge of deadline. Now, just to keep
Yeah.
your sanity, you like to have a lot. You have like to have more lead time, more of a time buffer, so you're not
Hmm.
feeling the anxiety like, oh shit, we got to go to press tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, um, I'll tell. I'm writing things right now that will see print. So we're in July.
Hmm.
That'll see print in December, January.
Okay.
You know, so I'm working about a half a year out from when
Okay.
things hit the cinemas, which is comfortable.
Hmm.
It gives you time to think about it, but not too much time to think about it because
Yeah.
I like the instinctual let's get it out the door mentality of comics, but I certainly don't like the night sweats of a deadline. So that 6 month out window is kind of the sweet
Hmm.
spot for me.
And that makes sense because, like I said, if it's a deadline, you might rush ideas that maybe make the story not hit as well. But you also, if you have too much time, you may overthink everything and
Yes,
go, I don't know, maybe maybe should we not? So it's that middle spot where you have enough time, but you got to get it done, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
and I guess that's the benefit of having a longer career is
Hmm.
that I'm not. I mean, when I first started, I was very precious about everything, every issue, every page, every panel, every bit of dialogue, every caption had to be
Hmm.
exactly right or whatever because
Yeah.
I didn't know if it would end tomorrow. So I want to make sure that the things that I put out at the time were the absolute best that I could do. I still have that attitude, but I realize that there's going to be more things down the line. There's no one project or one issue of anything that's
Hmm.
going to make or break me. I've just
Yeah.
assimilated the process better, and I'm more satisfied with what comes out of that churn. I mean, even if I look at something that comes out and I think, well, if I'd have had more time, it might have been more polished. But I can't deny there's an energy to getting something out the door fast or
Hmm.
relatively fast that you didn't, like you say, you didn't overthink it. So it has that certain something that good comics tend to have that where you feel there's an enthusiasm and energy to the work.
Hmm.
It's not perfect, but that energy makes up for a lot. And I love that energy.
And you're still doing it today, and I can't wait to see what you're working on next, comic wise, in terms of what you're writing, and animation wise, whatever this 3.5 year Bible. I'm curious to find out whatever that is.
A big IP,
And
I can tell you that it's a big IP.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I'm excited to find out what it is. Thank you so much, Joe, again for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it, and you have a good rest of your day, sir. Thank you so
You too,
much.
man. Thanks for having me.